Hello and welcome to Virtual Face-to-Face with Dr. Bruce Jarrell. I'm Alex Lakowski, Executive Director of Media Relations. Disruptive, unsettling, dissatisfied. Those are some of the nicer words university faculty around the country have used when recalling the very rapid transition out of the classroom and into cyberspace in March. Right away, the debate ensued. Many dismayed of a pernicious trend toward less effective and less valuable higher education. A Bayview Analytics survey of faculty conducted in mid-April seemed to confirm those fears. About half of those surveyed said they did reduce assignments, and about a third admitted relaxing expectations of performance. Not so fast, wrote three professors from Georgetown, Rollins, and Illinois State in the Chronicle of Higher Education. A large body of research has documented that good teaching is good teaching, whether it happens in a physical or in a virtual classroom. Rather than a collection of tips and tricks, good teaching is guided by research on how students learn. Well, it goes without saying that we at UMB are big believers in being guided by research. That's why 3 months ago today, May 20th, Interim Provost Roger Ward asked UMB faculty to participate in a survey sharing their experiences and the impact COVID-19 had on their teaching, research, scholarship, and clinical care. In a letter to faculty, he wrote, "We also want to know how you feel about UMB's COVID-19 response and what we can do to better support you as we plan to transition from a response to a recovery posture and a phased return to campus life." While UMB's survey was still in progress at the end of that frenzied spring 2020 semester, a Northern Arizona University professor summed up her experience this way: "Most of us have moved heaven and earth to ensure some kind of continuity in our students' education, even as we have spent our own days coping with emotional and personal strains we could hardly have imagined mere months ago. And unfortunately, it looks like many of us will be in the same predicament come September." Well, we haven't even gotten to September yet, but already hundreds of colleges that did plan to open their campuses have canceled or altered those plans due to rising health concerns. On Tuesday, Notre Dame suspended all in-person classes following a surge of COVID cases and a 19% positivity rate in testing. Michigan State President Samuel Stanley has asked students to stay home, at least for now, saying it is unlikely we can prevent widespread transmission of COVID-19 between students if our undergraduates return to campus. And in what has been characterized as a fiasco in the media, the University of North Carolina did an about-face this week, closing campus after a large COVID outbreak there. The chancellor says he was surprised by the velocity of the outbreak. The student newspaper headline proclaimed, "We all saw this coming." As you know, UMB this fall, it's round 2 of online learning. Nobody thinks it's perfect. No form of teaching and learning is perfect. Faculty and students everywhere appropriately question whether online teaching and learning can ever be as effective as the traditional forms we've been accustomed to. Educators and learners alike, including here at UMB, are earnestly grappling with that question. Today, our host, Interim Provost Roger Ward, is joined by a panel of faculty leaders to share key findings of the UMB Faculty COVID Survey, share your thoughts and experiences regarding effective remote teaching, and hear from you, the audience, on your views and ideas. Joining Dr. Ward are Isabelita Rambob, Assistant Professor in the School of Dentistry, David Gray, the Jacob A. France Professor of Law at the Francis King Carey School of Law, Adam Pouchet, Assistant Professor in the School of Medicine, Corey Stema, the Daniel Thurge Distinguished Professor of Social Justice at the School of Social Work, Brent Reed, Assistant Professor at the School of Pharmacy, Greg Spengler, Associate Vice President for Institutional Effectiveness, and Christina Sestone, Executive Director of the Faculty Center for Teaching and Learning. Welcome to you all. Now, I have to mention quickly that this program is being recorded and will be posted on the UMB COVID Recovery webpage, umaryland.edu/coronavirus. If you have a question or comment, please use the chat function. That's the button that looks like a speech bubble at the bottom of your screen. When the time comes, listen for your name. I'll unmute your mic for you, so all you have to do is speak up. And if you'd prefer to remain anonymous, just let me know that and I'll read the question for you. With all of that out of the way, here's your host, Dr. Roger Ward.
Thank you, Alex, and greetings all. Alex, as always, thank you very much for so eloquently teeing up the session's topic. Greetings again to the audience. Thank you all for engaging in this conversation and, in fact, for engaging in all the prior sessions with Dr. Jarrell. I am, of course, not Dr. Jarrell, but I am honored to be hosting in his stead. He's taking a well-deserved break from this particular session. And in fact, in chatting with him this morning about a myriad of other issues, I reminded him that, of course, I was hosting for him this afternoon, and he gave me one piece of advice: don't mess it up. And clearly, he has done a good job establishing these sessions as being informative and engaging. And while I can't promise that I won't mess it up, I'll certainly do my very best not to. It actually is going to be hard, I think, to mess up when you look at the talent we have on this panel and the wide range of expertise we have from our faculty and from our administrative leaders on this panel. So colleagues on the panel, I thank you all for making the time and taking the time for participating or to participate in this conversation. And while I'm saying thank yous, let me also take a moment and be intentional about saying thank you to a couple of constituents. First, our students. When you started last January and you entered the spring semester, none of you anticipated having to go to what I call and what we call emergency online or emergency remote instruction to complete the spring semester. It was put upon us because of the pandemic. I think you all agree that we did the responsible thing, but it was sudden and it was quick, and it was an emergency response. And we were all, or we remain indebted to you for your grace, your graciousness, students, your patience, your tolerance with us moving into that space, and with helping us as administrators and as faculty deal with a very, very difficult issue. I know firsthand myself, not only as an administrator, but also as a faculty member, because I happen in the spring to be co-teaching a course in the School of Law with Dean Tobin, and us being instructors in that course, of course, we too had to move the course online. And so we too benefited from your patience and grace as students and learned from that experience. And of course, I want to thank the faculty who themselves had to make that rapid adjustment, leaned in, threw themselves into the work just to make sure that our students, to the extent possible, given the emergency condition under which we were operating, had a quality educational experience. And I want to take the time to recognize the faculty for their time and effort and their commitment to making sure that teaching out the spring semester went as smoothly as was possible under the circumstances. I'm pleased to say that those faculty members have remained engaged all through the spring and into the summer, preparing for the eventuality that we may have to teach online in the fall. And so here we are entering the fall semester with that being a reality, where the majority of our didactic courses in particular will be taught online. And so the faculty has spent a great deal of time and effort over the summer working, getting prepared, getting to be better prepared, so that the learning experience for our students doesn't feel like emergency online education, that it feels like education. And so again, I applaud the faculty and thank the faculty and those who have been working with the faculty in the schools, at the university level and at the system level, to provide the support to make sure that our faculty are successful in their teaching endeavors. I'll be the first to acknowledge that the learning experience will be different. It's not in person for the most part. It's virtual, it's online. So the experience is going to be different. However, again, and having taught online and I continue to teach online and haven't done so for the past 15 years, I do believe that in terms of the education itself, the experience itself, the learning outcomes themselves, they can absolutely be accomplished online. So while the experience might be different, I fully expect that our students would receive a quality education online, not only because the faculty have invested the time and the effort, but also because the university has provided a lot of support to make sure that is the outcome. And so I encourage all of us, including the faculty and the students, to remain focused on that outcome, which is a good learning experience all around. So with that said, I subscribe to the notion that good teaching is good teaching, and I'm hoping, regardless of the venue, and I'm hoping that we could pick up on that theme a little later on in the conversation. But for right now, I want to turn it over to our Associate Vice President for Institutional Effectiveness, Greg Spengler, to talk a little bit and provide a high-level overview of the findings and key takeaways from a survey that we did towards the end of the spring into the summer. And it was a 50-question survey, and we surveyed the faculty. And in a nutshell, the purpose of the survey was really to learn from the faculty lived experience having to teach online or teach out the spring semester online. And we wanted to hear firsthand from them what that experience was like, and also get their thoughts, their input, their feedback on ways in which the university might make that experience better going forward. And we got a lot of very good feedback, and I'd ask Greg to share that information with you. And when he does so, after he's done doing that, I'll ask Dr. Christina Sestone, who leads our Faculty Center for Teaching and Learning, to pick up and put into context what Greg would have presented, particularly from her analysis of the qualitative feedback we also collected from the faculty in that survey. And then once we get past sharing, again, it's a high-level overview of the survey, we'll return to a conversation with the faculty experts we have here about their own experiences. So, Greg?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ward. So, as Dr. Ward mentioned, the provost office sponsored the survey. It was about 50 questions, but today, we're going to focus on those questions that were specific to faculty engaged in both didactic and clinical skills instruction. So, but first of all, I'd like to mention that the response rate to the survey was excellent. We had nearly 1,200 responses, and that works out to about 47% of full-time faculty. So we're all very happy that we have a really solid data set, and also the open-ended questions. The responses to those were plentiful, and I know it took Christina several weeks just to go through them, and I know she has some things to say there as well. So all schools are well represented. As Dr. Ward mentioned, this survey gauged the impact of COVID on both didactic and clinical skills teaching, which is the focus of today's program. But there are also questions on research, clinical practice, scholarly achievement, and general well-being. So I invite you to view the narrated version of the survey results. So relating to the findings specific to the approximately 800 faculty who responded, who were engaged in either didactic or clinical skills instruction, or sometimes both, there were less than 40% of those faculty were teaching online before March, before COVID, and nearly 80% of them moved some portion of their instruction, if not all of it, to be online after that. Of these faculty teaching online, about half of them sought assistance, and most often they would seek assistance from their peers or from staff within their schools. Although, as I'm sure will come out in today's discussion, there are a variety of resources available for assistance. We asked what sort of assistance would faculty find most useful moving forward, and the top two responses were information on how to best engage students in an online learning environment, and also what are some of the best practices for teaching from home. We also wanted to gauge what was the impact of this transition on the amount of time that faculty spent on their teaching mission, and about 60% of faculty reported spending more time on their teaching mission as a result of COVID. However, related to this, about 2/3 of faculty perceived a reduction in instructional effectiveness due to this transition, but that also means that 1/3 of faculty either saw no impact or actually perceived an increase in instructional effectiveness. So at the end of the day, about 84% of faculty indicated some level of concern with student preparedness for continued study. Now, we also realize that instruction does not, especially at home, does not occur in a vacuum, and that there are other environmental factors that may impact the ability of faculty to provide instruction. So there were also questions in the survey that asked if faculty were involved in teaching, or I should say learning, and this could include themselves. And in fact, more than 60% of faculty, which is over 650, had at least one household member, including themselves, engaged in at-home learning. And this was, of course, back in the end of May, early June. So, we can appreciate that there's likely to be a substantial ongoing impact occurring in just the next few weeks. 20% of these faculty had 3 or more household members engaged in online learning at home. So, and more than half of these faculty were the primary facilitators of this home-based learning. So those are some of the highlights of the survey. Again, additional information has been made available to you. And at this point, I'll pass it over to Christina, who will speak at length about some of the online, or I should say the open-ended questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks so much, Dr. Ward, for convening the group. As Greg mentioned, there was quite a bit of almost 100 pages of narrative response from about a quarter of the faculty who responded to the overall survey. And in the analysis of that data, what we learned were that there were several themes. The questions that we posed to faculty specifically were, really just openly, what worked well? And then what did you find challenging about the whole transition to online and remote teaching during the spring? And so what faculty really said was kind of echoing what Dr. Ward started with in terms of students and their attitudes and their behaviors. That was really the top cited theme in what faculty wrote about this experience. So these are things like just the positivity, the attention, the acceptance, and the patience that students exhibited to faculty as they dealt with learning new technology and getting their materials transferred to the online space. Another top finding was the instructional practices as cited as wins, meaning faculty really felt that they had a new openness, creativity, ability to reach more students with their expertise through the online environment. And so that was something that really emerged in the comments. And a third area of what worked well for faculty in this transition were the supports. And I think what stood out for me was the sense of community in UMB that faculty expressed from sharing materials and access to materials with their colleagues, the support that they received from school-specific teams, and of course the leadership. And so there was a strong theme on instructional supports. And then of course the technology. While that's also a challenge for faculty, the technology was something that they felt the institution we had the tools, we had the resources and the things that we needed in place, and it was just a function of getting going. And then in terms of challenges, I think that the number of challenges was about the same. Technology, as I mentioned, was one of the top ones, and this really wasn't just about the tech tools. This was also folks having challenges at home with their office setup, or the internet connectivity issues that they weren't ready to work at home at this level. So that was some of the comments that came out. But then also in challenges, the instructional practices. So the feeling of this variability that students were having in the instructional space, impacts to clinical instruction, and the feeling that you just can't replicate hands-on instruction with the online environment. So that was a big challenge that faculty reported. Another challenge, which was a very dominant part of the commentary, included faculty issues around well-being. So their ability to balance work and home life, being online, as Greg mentioned, with schooling, being responsible for other schooling during the day, and that interfering with their ability to not only teach, but do other aspects of their work. I would say that, again, the full survey does have a lot more detail, the narrated survey that will be posted, but I'm also open to questions that you all have about the comments, because it was such a numerous, significant part of the survey. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Christina. And as they both mentioned, the survey is available. Christina and Greg both worked hard to pull the information, the findings together, make it accessible. So a narrated presentation of that survey is available. And I don't know if you, Alex, have had an opportunity yet to post it in the chat, but we do have a link to that. And we'll be certain to share that survey with you.
I have posted it, Roger.
All right, good. Thanks, Alex. All right, so with that as a backdrop in terms of those key findings, let me now turn to our faculty experts who lived this experience and who have been living this experience, some longer than others because of how long they've been teaching online or in the hybrid space, to talk about what their own experiences have been. And so what I'd like to do now is ask each of you in turn to, again, reintroduce yourself to the audience for those folks who may have joined a little late, but more specifically to talk about what your own experience has been teaching online, even before we had to go to remote emergency teaching in the spring. What experience, if any, you had teaching online, and then what your experience was teaching in that emergency mode, and then we'll take the conversation from there to talk about how your approach to preparing for the fall semester. So maybe, Adam, I could start with you.
Sure, happy to. So I'm Adam Fouché, professor at the School of Medicine. And I would say that I was a complete novice going into the online educational world. My responsibilities revolved a lot about anatomy and surgical training, which was not an area that we really considered as online delivery. But as we explored the process and the transition, we realized that there could be effective delivery and effective teaching using those same principles. And we dove in feet first, bit of anatomy humor there, to get to the process that we have evolved towards.
Very good. Corey?
I'm trying to unmute myself. Oh.
I've unmuted you, Corey. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Hi, I'm Corey Shtema. I'm a professor at the School of Social Work. I actually was not teaching in the spring when things went to hybrid when things went to fully virtual, but I have been teaching a combination of hybrid classes plus for various reasons, emergency needs to go online when I wasn't expecting to for about the past 4 or 5 years. So I've both been in situations where I've contemplated and been ready to go and where I haven't been. And I've been working very closely both with our School of Social Work, Clark Shaw Nelson and his team, and with Erin Hagar from Christina's team at the campus level, pretty much through all of the summer to transition my course.
Thank you. What about
for the fall?
Brent?
Oh, well, thank you for letting me be a part of this panel. So my name is Brent Reed, and I'm an associate professor at the School of Pharmacy, and I also practice at the Medical Center in Advanced Heart Failure. In addition to teaching in our cardiology therapeutic sequences at the school, I also teach a first-year course called the Professional Foundations of Pharmacy, where we focus on really the core tenets of professionalism, things like empathy and altruism. And that course really presented probably the most challenges because so much of that was active learning and trying to figure out how do you transition that to an online environment was definitely presented a lot of challenges. I did have some experience with online teaching, but certainly wouldn't consider myself an expert in that regard. I think one thing that's sort of helped me is that during all of this time, I was also finishing up a graduate degree. And so I had the experience of seeing what it was like as a student while also being a teacher. And I think that seeing both of those perspectives simultaneously really helped me learn a lot and adapt some things to my courses in the future.
Oh, thank you. Isabel? Dr. Rambod?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Isabel Rambod. I'm a clinical assistant professor at the School of Dentistry. And I thank you for the opportunity to join this panel. So by experience teaching online, I had some previous experience, but not in a formal course, by presenting webinars and doing some video conferences. But this was the first time that I had to move a course online. And what really worked for me was to really be open and honest with the students and ask for feedback. So I emailed my class and I asked them like what we can do to enhance your online learning experience. And they were very supportive and understanding there was a very rapid transition. It just happened that Christine invited me to be part of the online teaching community way before this whole pandemic. I'm just curious to know more about online learning, and which is led, this online teaching community is led by Dr. Michelle Pierce, and both of them have been so helpful to really help me to transition to.
Thank you, Isabel. Professor Gray?
David, we're not hearing you. You may have to check your settings, and we'll try again. No, I guess we'll have to come back to David.
We'll have to come back to David. That's technology for you. And so let me pick up on a couple of points that were made. And I also want to highlight, I can't recall if Greg touched on this in his presentation, but we talked about faculty moving courses online. I think it's important to point out that in some instances, we had faculty members moving at least having to move at least 3 courses online. So it wasn't just one course. Of course, there were faculty members who had to move one, but my point here is that in some instances, an individual faculty member might have been teaching as many as 3 courses and had to move those online. So that, of course, is a significant lift, or was a significant lift. So maybe that allows me to talk a little bit or ask a little bit about, I know, Isabel, you alluded to it, some of the resources that you tapped into to allow you to make that transition. And maybe, and certainly you, Corey, talked about working with the talent in your school to help you with your hybrid instruction. And so maybe it would be good to hear from some of you what resources you tapped into, whether that was at the school level or at the university level or elsewhere, or peer-to-peer outreach. And then maybe, Christina, you could talk some about the resources that are available currently at the university and certainly at the school level as well, and even at the university system level. Is David hot? Alex?
Well, he's trying, but I just wanted to let you know that Dr. Rambob is having a problem hearing now for some reason, so we're going to try to get her squared away.
Okay, good.
And we still don't have David yet. I'm sorry.
Okay, good.
I'm okay now, thanks.
Okay, so she's back. So anyone, the faculty members, where did you turn for assistance and guidance in terms of moving to the online teaching space?
So I'm happy to throw in something here. I had some experience working with our social work folks, like I said, but I also turned to the faculty campus level. I think one thing that's really was helpful for me, though, before deciding both where to turn and whether to turn, is that I felt like it was very important for me to have a balance between having help and being independent. Because in my experience, I could end up in the middle of a class and I wouldn't right away have recourse to somebody, or maybe I'm trying to set something up from one day to the next. And there is a process of trying out the tools on your own that you get by learning by doing. And so even before deciding where to turn, I would say, okay, can I do this myself? And do a little bit of trying. And when I decide, oh, I'm so frustrated, or this is really something I don't know, it's kind of when to turn. So I would encourage people to think about that balance there. So not going on your own when you're frustrated, but to try and do some of them on yourselves and by yourself. And also, if there are techniques, what I found really helpful is both at the campus level and the school level is a lot of times all of the people were, they show you what they're doing so that you can hopefully learn and gain some facility, to do some things yourselves. And that's, again, a resource issue, but it's also a confidence issue and learning how to feel, confident in the tools and confident to be using them. And it is something of a delicate balance. And it helped me also step back and think. One thing I really appreciated was not just the technical help, but in both of those instances, there was pedagogical help. So they would say to me, well, what is it you're trying to do and why? Right. So not just the technical. And when we think about what are we trying to do, what function is it serving in our classroom, then it can sometimes let us go from doing it the same way. Maybe it can't be done exactly the same way. And so I found both the campus level and school level resources helpful in sort of calming me down, having me step back a moment, think, what is the purpose of this thing that I'm doing? And that way I could be open to maybe doing something, getting a goal of mine in a completely different way than I hadn't thought of.
So, Corey, you raised a number of interesting points, I thought. And one has to do with the technology that enables one to teach online or teach in a hybrid environment, and then the pedagogy, everything that goes into course design, the way you structure your assessments, how you assess student learning, and so on. And oftentimes when people think about online teaching, online learning, they always focus on the technology. Technology is important, obviously. Those are important tools, and the tools we use are important, just as they are when we're teaching in person, by the way. But so too is the pedagogy, the course design. And I think often where faculty members struggle and stumble is that they think they could use the same approach that they would use teaching in person and just transfer that online. Of course, the environment is different, so you do sometimes have to make some changes to pedagogical design, your course design, in order for that instruction to be as effective as it could be. And
am I here now? Yay! So I'm David Gray. I'm a teacher over at the law school, and I think I was invited to join this panel because I'm the straight man or a bit of a patsy in that I love teaching. The first time I stepped into a classroom, I knew that this was my life's mission, that this is where I needed to be in life. And then the spring came, and I taught my first online class, and I just wept in my chair after the class was over. Because everything that I loved about teaching had been ripped away from me and ripped away from the students. And the students, God bless them, were very, very patient with me, but it was an unmitigated disaster by any measure. And so I started out the summer just trying to consume every instructional video or lesson or online class that I could find for online teaching, and had the good fortune of being part of a meeting where Christina made a presentation and immediately emailed her and said, save me, help me, help me, help me. And so I could not recommend more highly the resources at the Faculty Center for Teaching and Learning. And just to answer specifically the question that Dr. Ward had just put forward, is that was the real breakthrough for me. I realized that after 10 odd years of teaching, that I'd gotten a little bit lazy on my pedagogy. I was doing things because they're the way that I'd done them. And this has become an incredible opportunity to completely rethink the way that I approach teaching, the way that I think about assessments, and the way that I think about measuring my competence as a teacher. And so it has been an incredibly steep learning curve, but also an incredible gift to have that opportunity to really rethink pedagogy, to learn a whole new set of tools that I think are going to carry with me afterwards. Even when I'm back in the live classroom, I will be back in a live classroom. All of the lessons that I've learned and I'm continuing to learn from this process, I'm going to carry with me. And so I think to the extent there's any silver lining in this for me, it's that I think I'll be a much more effective, or at least a much more thoughtful teacher going forward after all of the assistance that I've had from the Faculty Center for Teaching and Learning and the experiences that I've had with my students.
And I think that is exactly right, David. You know, about 5 years ago, and if Dr. Lilly were on this call, he would relate that experience. The graduate school moved into teaching its contemporary program. We're designing them so that they could be taught completely online or hybrid. And of course, we worked with faculty in the School of Medicine in bringing up some of our earliest programs. And those faculty members were, of course, more used to teaching in person. And after they tolerated us and they worked with us to develop the skills to teach effectively online, I think almost to a person, each faculty member said when they returned to their in-person classroom, they found that they were much better instructors because they had learned so much about pedagogy, course design, assessments, and so on. So even I would completely agree, even though this experience might not have been what you bargained for initially, I think, David, I would agree with you when you say it's a gift. And for those of us who are teaching online, we should view it as such and recognize that at some point you will get back into the classroom. We have a commitment to that. And hopefully you would have had the experience where, because of your opportunities to teach online, it would strengthen you as a faculty member when you return to your in-person instruction. And that even when you're doing primarily in person, that you would use the tools and the approaches you would have been exposed to teaching online to help make the learning experience even better for our students. Anyone else want to weigh in on that question before I ask Christina to talk about resources? Isabel and Brent?
Sure. Which really helped me to go through this process. I got a book, Effective Online Teaching, and also the University System of Maryland. They offer the Quality Matters workshops and was free of charge for faculty because the system paid for. So I watched a lot of those workshops and was very helpful. and also make me to reflect and be more intentional about my teaching and how I can make the online learning environment a very positive experience for these students. So I think this is an opportunity for us, what we can do better moving forward.
Brent, did you want to weigh in?
I just wanted to take a moment to really acknowledge a lot of my peer faculty here at the school. We had some advantage in that we'd had several graduate level programs that were already mostly online, if not entirely exclusively online. And the faculty who had experience in doing that were just so helpful in assisting us navigate some of those issues because they'd had such experience. I really felt important to recognize all that help during a very busy time. And I guess the other place that I really found helpful was I turned to Twitter for sort of ideas and insights. There's a very vibrant academic community on there, people sharing what was working for them and not working for them really in real time, and the opportunity to sort of engage with those educators and learn from their experiences, I felt like was really helpful to me as well.
Thanks for that, Brent. It's interesting because you talked about your peers, and that allows me the opportunity to point something out that might not have been apparent or may not be apparent to many folks. UMB actually isn't novel, even though we had to go to emergency online teaching. Online education, online teaching, hybrid education isn't entirely new to UMB. As Brent suggested, certainly there are certain schools. Pharmacy is a perfect example. School of Nursing is an excellent example. The graduate school, and social work as well. There are faculty members in all of these schools who have for some time now been using technology to enhance the learning environment for their students and been teaching online and teaching in a hybrid manner. So I think we have the benefit here at the university of having people, again, all along the continuum, and we have people at the far end of the continuum who have very, very good experience teaching online. And so in addition to the resources that we'll talk about, I promise, we should know that we have also faculty peers who could assist any of us with the experience. Christina, you want to talk about some of the resources and ways in which faculty engage with the Faculty Center?
Sure, thank you. Before I jump into that, I did want to capitalize on a comment that Corey made about trying to kind of learn and be somewhat self-sufficient in the process, so not just relying on others. And I think that brings up the idea of experimentation and teaching as experimentation. And so it's really, when you think about it, it's never going to be perfect the first time out of the gate. And I think, I've heard from a lot of faculty, they have those expectations, both for demonstrating to students the quality of the learning experience they're about to engage in, but then also because they are experts in their field and that they expect that of themselves. And if we could give ourselves breaks as faculty to say, the online teaching experience, the early and first time out of the gate isn't going to be perfect, that we can look at it maybe as experimentation and then avail ourselves to the resources of the supports to help us make it better over time. But we do have a ton of resources and a ton of support, and I think peers are a big part of that. And as Isabel mentioned, we have an online teaching community where faculty kind of drive the topics, they drive the conversation, and that is something that meets monthly. It'll begin once again at the start of the academic year. And that's something that's hosted by the Faculty Center for Teaching and Learning. Of course, we have our website. So there's a lot of support in terms of our direct website, which is fairly new. Fortunately, it launched in February, right before COVID. So we've been able to use it as a space for communication and videos and other types of links to resources that might be useful. And so that's really at the central administration level. But we also, as others have mentioned, there are teams within the schools that are ed tech experts. They also have some instructional designers within the school. And I think in pharmacy, there's sort of a cross-functional team that's supporting faculty as they prepare for fall, both on the technology and the design perspective. And then there are assessment experts in the schools as well. So there are lots of resources at the school level, and the center does work collaboratively with each of the schools to cross-promote and support those resources. And then, as Dr. Ward mentioned, the system has been really amazing in terms of that other part of the stool for support, the other leg at this of the stool in support of offering professional development seminars. As a nascent faculty center for teaching and learning, we don't think we could have nearly had the reach to help faculty in the professional development training that if it weren't for the system. So I think, Isabel, I think you mentioned the QM sessions. We had more than 300 registrants just from UMB for those courses. And of course, others across the system are taking advantage of those. Any topic from being new online to integrating active learning strategies to assessment in the online classroom. And so those have been really well attended by our faculty. And there is also the iDesign support, which you may have seen on the Faculty Center's website, but this is something hosted by the system that will be like a helpline, will be like another lifeline for instructional design support as you get into the fall. And so we hope that folks take advantage of all of these resources and certainly contacting our staff as well if you have questions or needs. Thank you.
Thanks, Christina. I was thinking through, I mentioned, of course, pharmacy, nursing, graduate school, social work as all having experience online. But then as I'm thinking through the schools, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that, of course, the School of Law also has an MSL program, Master of Science in Law program, that I'm a proud graduate of, I'm pleased to say. I took that program completely online and found it to be, the learning experience to be very, 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 very good. So again, we do have experienced faculty, and our schools, all our schools, have experience in that regard. Now, one thing we did hear in the survey, and Adam, I'll come to you just to get your point of view first, is that faculty in the survey expressed some concern about students' preparedness, readiness to learn online. It's interesting because even as the faculty grapple with their own effectiveness, they're worried, appropriately, I guess, about the students' ability to learn online and ways in which, and of course, once you have that concern, you need to start thinking about ways in which strategies for engaging those students so that they could be drawn in and you get to the student learning outcomes that you would expect. So Adam, as someone who, of course, took a course that lends itself mostly to being taught in person, what, if any, concerns, one, did you have with students being engaged and learning, and two, what strategies did you adopt to engage students in that learning?
Well, I would actually argue that there was, to my mind, no difference in my concern about students' preparedness, whether it was an in-person class or an online class, because that's really a pedagogical issue, is how do you get students prepared for a session? I have been to many small group session trainings in person where the students have not read any material ahead of time and they don't know what they're talking about. I don't see that as any different in the online world where they go online and they haven't read any of the material and don't know what we're talking about. So that is more a generic concern than it is specific to the online world. And I think that there has been a wide range of active learning strategies that have been implemented pedagogically. Christina's got experience with those as well, to try to get a heightened degree of responsibility for ownership of the material. And I think trying to instill that sense in the students that they are owners of their own education. They are owners of their own content. And to get them to feel like they want to be prepared to make the most out of the session is the sort of strategy that I tried to engage in, so that when they're viewing the anatomic material training online, that they want to be able to participate in the active learning components. And if they're not ready to participate in that, they're going to feel left out of the experience. And so by trying to instill that concept was what I was aiming towards, was to try to get the students to feel that they desire to be better prepared, not that I'm making them be better prepared.
You know, when you're hosting one of these panel sessions, you have to multitask, and I'm trying to keep up with the comments, of course, of the panelists and the chat. And I see Alex has posted that there are a few questions there. So I just want to say to those folks who have posed questions and others of you who are thinking about posing questions, this session actually runs for 90 minutes as opposed to the 1 hour that Dr. Jarrell usually does. So we're going to be here till about 2:30. For those of you who have gotten accustomed to it just being 1 hour. So we will leave some time to get to those questions. So hopefully you have the time to stick with us. And so we'll come to your questions, but I want to see if any other members of the panel want to talk about strategies, one, their perception about student engagement, because that did come out in the survey, but their own experiences with that and strategies for engaging students.
So if I may, I think there are sort of two questions there. One goes to student preparedness and one goes to student participation. And one of the great gifts that this whole process has given me in terms of student preparedness is the idea of formative assessments as opposed to summative assessments. So the traditional way to assess students in law school is a high stakes, 100% of your grade, end of the semester exam. And one of the great, one of the tools that I've really, and that I find really promising in the online environment is the availability of these low stakes, essentially pass-fail formative assessments that you can give on a regular basis. And so without using any class time at all, any of that precious synchronous class time at all, I can give students a 5 multiple choice question quiz that they have to take before class. And the only way for them to really take that quiz is to be at least minimally prepared. And so that assures me that people who are there for the synchronous class have at least read the material in enough with care enough to be able to answer those 5 low stakes questions. I will say candidly, I am a little bit more worried about engagement in synchronous class sessions. And part of that is just a function of the limitations of the technology. Part of it is my lack of familiarity with engaging people in synchronous conversations on this platform. And then the other thing that is just a real concern for me is privacy and the privacy interests that students have. And in an environment where we are recording all of our classes, I kind of have to rethink what participation in class looks like for students who quite rightly don't want to have their images or voices recorded and published on the learning management system.
And David, I'd look forward to reading your scholarship on privacy. For those of you who may not know, privacy in cyberspace, if I could characterize it that way, is certainly a scholarship focus for you, and you're a national expert on that. So you're living something that you're probably going to have to write about pretty soon in terms of privacy issue that you just highlighted. Corey?
Yeah, I think similar to David and what a lot of people here are saying is this idea of sort of the gift. And I think in thinking about student engagement, there's kind of 3 parts to it. It's the coming prepared to class, it's participating while they're in class, and then it's figuring out what came out, what they got out of class. So I am was less concerned about the idea of sort of assessing in terms of measuring or giving a grade, but just want students to be excited. And so really like that idea of, having it be internally motivated. And this is where it was really helpful. My conversations with Aaron from the campus level center and also with Clark are just really brainstorming. There are quite a few different tools even in face-to-face in-person classes, we have students who do not like to participate in a full group, right? So we might have small group exercises, and we have different ways of assessing that. And so I was introduced, this is where I would say, okay, this is what I'm interested in doing. So there's journaling where the students can communicate directly with the teacher right before or afterwards. There's discussion boards where students can participate with their classmates. So I might say, answer these questions on the reading beforehand, 24 hours before, read what everybody else is thinking. And then when you come into the synchronous environment, you have to, and don't just say, oh, it's good, it's bad, say something informal of substance. And then, in class, I might break them into small groups. We've come up with, maybe there's a shared Google document that students will input, every student will input something into either after the class or, right? So it opens up a whole array of tools that you can use in order to figure out and make sure people are learning. I do think it's really important, though, with the students, just like in a classroom environment, is this idea of communication. So I think there's a lot of trepidation around technology and recognizing both our own and students. So it does give us an easier way than in class, almost, because you can check in, has everybody weighed in here? So I think doing outreach, and if someone isn't participating, why aren't you participating? Normalizing an environment for people who are not afraid to say, my toddler was sitting on my lap and I couldn't respond, or, I've never used this technology before. So I think communicating ahead of time that you can either say something, or what are the forums, right? You can use a discussion forum to post technology questions. You can ask me privately, but to really signal and normalize, this is unprecedented times. Please ask me if you're not sure. And then also for students who aren't participating, following up with them and trying to see what the hurdles are, which is really good teaching, of any kind, like you said, Roger, earlier, but the technology gives us more options of doing that, I think.
Thank you, Corey. Brett, you wanted to?
I did. Thank you, Roger. I wanted to go back to the part of your question about preparedness, and I think the one major concern that I have as it relates to preparedness is because the online learning is often less structured than the live on-site learning. It really requires students to kind of build their own structure, and I think many of the prior experiences of these students are they've gotten used to coming to campus, having classes at a specific time, and there's a structure that already exists. And probably few of them have had sort of a blank slate in their day and deciding, when do I watch this asynchronous lecture? How do I prepare for this stuff? And having to build some of that structure into their day. And sort of related to that, I worry about some of the cognitive load that comes with the lack of boundaries. And I think, a lot of us have had to deal with that as we've transitioned to telework. It becomes a little bit easier to, when you only have to move one room over to start your work day, it's a little bit easier to start a little bit earlier, run a little bit later, maybe mix, non-work and work aspects of our lives. And I think, that comes with an additional cognitive load. So I think helping students navigate what it means to develop some structure in your day when it's not already provided by the class schedule, I think can be a way that we help students be prepared for an online learning environment.
Thanks for that, Brent. You sort of delved in a little bit to some of the challenges of synchronous versus asynchronous. And maybe before we turn to questions from the audience, Christine, I could ask you to talk a little bit about how you talk to faculty and work with faculty in both those designs, synchronous versus asynchronous, and how faculty may think about creating that structure so students don't struggle in the ways Brent just described.
Sure. Yeah, this is a very hotly debated and discussed topic, I think, since we moved fully into planning for fall. And there is the cognitive load cannot be minimized in terms of the comments that you contributed, Brent, in the home space when you're working and learning from home and teaching from home. And so what is particularly something that we talk a lot about when we say asynchronous, which is how do you structure your online course so that a student can learn at their pace. And we talk a lot about that for adult learners, people who are also working professionals and pursuing degrees at the same time. And the freedom and flexibility that asynchronous piece provides to the learner. And there's lots of ways to do that. I think discussion boards were mentioned, shared Google Doc projects, creation of wikis, other types of projects. And so there's ways that students can, at their leisure, they have a defined window of time, for example, in which to complete an assignment, but they can go in and make their post or contribute their entry to the conversation or to the project. And asynchronous is valuable also for faculty. And I think faculty, there's this perception in some circles that it's a 1-for-1, right? So if you lecture for 2 hours in person and that's your course section, that's translating somehow into the schedule when we move online. That is a heavy burden, a heavy load for faculty as well. To be live for that amount of time. We've already brought up the privacy issues if it's being recorded. And so that synchronous burden can weigh heavy on faculty as well. And the online space is different. We've made that point, and there are ways to structure activities and discussion so that you can see the progression of students through that space without being live all the time. And so we did actually post a video that gives a few tips and tricks on how to move some of the synchronous to asynchronous. And hopefully, if you've defined your goals and objectives for those segments of your course, you'll still see the same outcomes that you might have had otherwise if you were in person.
Thanks for that, Christina. Maybe, Alex, this is a good time to pivot to try and get at some of the questions folks may have. And of course, if people have questions, they should feel free to enter them into the chat box, and Alex and we could pick them up from there. But what do you have for us by way of questions, Alex? Well,
Claire Bodie in the School of Nursing has a few comments about her experiences with the faculty. Claire, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so I came to the faculty center kind of late into the transition. So I didn't have when we first transitioned, it was probably the end of April before I realized that valuable resource was available to me. But I have to say, so I've appreciated that as a resource moving forward. I teach in the summer, I teach in the fall, so it's been helpful as I've moved forward. We have excellent resources at the School of Nursing as well. The nursing education faculty really made themselves available to us as needed as we transitioned. I found for myself, I realized early on that you can't do a 4-hour lecture synchronously online and expect anybody to understand what you're saying. And I think that was a difficulty when we were in a face-to-face course, and the easy thing to do was just take your lectures and deliver them synchronously online. So I've actually, for myself, moved to some active learning engagement, because where I would do voiceover PowerPoints short, and then have them do some active group experiences during the class time, because I as myself, listening to my fellow faculty deliver lecture, and I came out of it going, oh my gosh, I'm exhausted, and I already theoretically knew this content. I could only imagine the students. It's also some of the other challenges were with the students really, it wasn't just shifting what they did, it was the fact that the library was closed. I had students who have young children, and their method of studying was to have the babysitter, the nanny, their spouse, their their mother, take the children for a block of time, and they would actually go to the library, and that was how they studied for their classes. And it really blew them up in a way to not have that available, because if you're there and you're the parent, it doesn't matter who else is there. It's you they're coming at. You can't really hide. So they struggled with the end of the semester to be able to do their scholarship. And of course, we have very high stake, our students are really high stakes, and they come in, they're excellent students. So for them, letting go of excellence is very difficult. And they don't give themselves that permission. So anyway, that's all I have to say. But I think
that's very helpful. That perspective is very helpful. And what we don't want students to do, and this goes back to my opening point about quality, and certainly the faculty is working hard to make sure that the quality is there, even though the experience might be different, is to come in letting go of an expectation that the online experience, the online education would be of a lesser quality, because then that is problematic. I think our faculty expect our students to have high expectations of what they're going to learn from the faculty, and certainly the faculty have that expectation themselves. And I think that's part of the debate that we've been having nationally. I think there are some that assume, and I know the caller isn't among this group, but there are some that just assume that because the education is online, it is inherently inferior. And I completely reject that argument, given my own experience teaching online and learning online in our own law school. And so I see Corey jumping at the bit to jump in here, so I'll allow her to do that. And then Alex, we could tee up the next question.
Sorry, I'm not sure of the, who can see me and what. I just wanted to throw in there that I think that, I want to agree with you, but I also want to think that our campus in particular, because we are all professional schools, we have our students, not only when they graduate, but right now, they are actually working with human beings and practicing. And so I think that we have in a special, and then they're going to go out into the world. And so we have, each one of our schools have a gatekeeping function in that sense. And so I think the importance of excellence in professional education is, I just really wanted to emphasize that we really have to be concerned about that.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Corey, because I think we've talked about that, Christina, in terms of using what we're learning, because we're a different type of institution. We are primarily graduate and professional education. We absolutely have undergraduate students in our School of Nursing, and some in dentistry, and even some in medicine. But again, that's a relatively small percentage of who our students are. And certainly, as it relates to the School of Nursing, even those undergraduate students are upper class students who themselves are already licensed in many instances as nurses. And so, yeah, we do have that gatekeeping function, and we have, as an institution, I like to say, a unique opportunity to sort of be thought leaders in this space in terms of developing best practices, good techniques for what professional and graduate education could look like when done well. And I'm so impressed with how our faculty has thrown themselves in to become those experts. And I imagine that in the years to come, we could perhaps, again, be thought leaders in that space. Back to you, Alex, for questions.
Oh, sure. Well, was it another faculty member for the School of Nursing, Susan Anko, is on with a very specific question. Susan, can you ask your question?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I think Christina answered a lot of the content with respect to that continuum between face-to-face and then moving into hybrid and synchronous and asynchronous. And so I'm very interested in, number one, how those who have actually made this transition made the decision, which pathway to take. And also, how would we optimize at each level that we have available those exercises and resources to engage the students? So I'm interested in if there's any more, conversation in this area.
Great question, Susan. Who wants to take that?
So I'm
David.
happy to take a swing. And so part of my emotional recovery from the spring was being prepared for all possibilities this fall. And so under the guidance of the Faculty Center, I was developing what's called a high flex class, where I would be teaching online, or I would be teaching live in person in the law school to a rotating group of students. Students not rotating through would be attending virtually by a live stream. And then of course I would have virtual office hours. But in the background, I was preparing for the possibility of a complete asynchronous class, both out of concern that who knows what the pandemic is going to do, but also for some of the reasons that the first audience member gave, which is that our students have a whole host of challenges that we can't fully appreciate because we don't live in their skins, and that are going to affect their ability to participate in a synchronous environment. And so I've actually been doing both. I've been recording a whole series of short 6 to 10 minute lectures that are mainly overviews, some a little bit more in depth. I have a whole series of formative assessments, and then I'm using some online materials that were developed by a group called the Center for Excellence in Learning, Online Learning and Legal Education, or something like that. CALI is the acronym. And they have a whole group of sort of self-directed lessons that students can go through that provide them real-time feedback on the concepts that they are both comfortable with and where they need more work. And then I'm also planning to teach my synchronous class in sort of a flipped classroom model with recorded classes. And the whole idea there is that students will be able to engage the class when they can, how they can, in ways that are most effective for them. And then we'll learn more about what works at the end of the semester. But the answer to that question is, for me, all of the above. I'm doing everything.
Thanks for that, David. Anyone else wants to? Adam?
Yes, I might follow up a little on that. In that, similar to David, we had to be prepared for either a fully online environment or an in-person environment or some hybrid of the two. And it's always been a goal to provide time for students to have self-directed asynchronous learning elements, but also to resynchronize the class at regular intervals, even each day, because of the need to jigsaw different pieces together. And so I would agree with David that it's not an either-or argument. It's really that there is a need to do both synchronous and asynchronicity in a good design structure.
Thank you, Corey.
Yeah, and I also, one of those things is there's no clear answers, right? It depends on the needs of your students. It might depend on, where you are at as an instructor. And I just wanted to throw in the mix there. So I teach PhD students, and this is regardless. Not all of them are in the country right now because they can't get here. And so in terms of synchronous and asynchronous, I have a student from India and a student from China. And so we'll be juggling time zone issues as well. And even if they're able to be up, maybe they're in a house where it's the middle of the night. And so, so that's another consideration, what else is going on. And we haven't really talked about the international students, but we have had to consider that as well. And here's a shout out to Charlotte Bright from our PhD program, who is also working with, for example, students from China. We needed to, and thanks to Becky Menendez from the Center for Teaching and Learning, who pointed out that student might need a VPN, which it turns out, had already been set up for her from the school social work. So additional considerations on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Additional considerations. And one of the benefits of asynchronous versus synchronous, it gets to one of the issues that came up in the faculty survey, but also in the student survey. And I should point out, we did do a student survey as well to get what the lived experiences were for our students in the spring. And maybe at some point we'll have a similar session to talk about what our findings were there. But for someone like me who like to teach, and I like to teach, and I teach every semester actually, either online because it's the only way I could do it. And I also have an affinity to teaching graduate and what we would call non-traditional, what they call post-traditional learners. So these are usually people in my class who are usually working, have families, and so on. And so the asynchronous format allows people that flexibility to balance their life situation with learning. And I would imagine that given that faculty themselves now are teaching from home, have their own caregiving responsibilities, hopefully they recognize that moving some of what they would typically do face-to-face synchronously, the asynchronous format might help them also bring some balance to their lives. Any other questions there for us, Alex?
We have questions. Next is Oksana Mishler from the School of Dentistry, who has a comment about the use of technology. Oksana, you can go ahead.
Go ahead, Oksana.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for this wonderful discussion. I think it's very important to talk about technology and online learning. And I think even going forward, it's even more important to know that we have wonderful resources on campus and in each and individual school. And I'm personally a big fan of online learning. I had a great experience and I appreciate the flexibility of online learning. And it sounds like my students do too. I was one of those faculty who end up teaching a 4-credit course which had large didactic and preclinical component in the School of Dentistry. And in good old day, I will record all those videos, high definition videos using microscopes in the Department of Periodontics. Well, I did not have that luxury to do this spring because I had no access to those microscopes. So what I want to share that a simple technology like an iPhone can definitely do that. It's available to everyone, and there are some software that you can buy fairly reasonable. For less than $100, I downloaded the editing software, and I was able to create those videos for my students, close-ups with all the captions and transitions and even music if I wanted to, and got all the wonderful feedback. And also, as far as online learning, what I learned, I was very fortunate. I've taken a lot of courses about online education. My master's degree was predominantly in education. And what I've learned that it's very important to establish a presence of instructor in the course. Yes, we are not there face to face, but create that presence as much as you can. And for me, even if I have lessons with voiceover, I always make sure I put my picture in there. So they feel like not just the microphone is talking to them, that there is a person behind that. And great discussion about synchronous and asynchronous. Of course, has benefits, both have benefits, depends on what you're looking for. And some students who actually moved for their spring break to their family on West Coast appreciate a synchronous component of my course a lot. And what I just want to mention that going forward, I would like to have more discussions like that and make those resources, advertise them maybe even more frequently, more often, because people have tendency to forget or overlook. And this is all I have to say. Thank you all. Thank you.
Well, that's a lot of good stuff to say, Oksana. I appreciate you calling in. And just because we're an equal opportunity institution, I want to acknowledge the Android users out there. When Oksana said iPhone, those features are available to those of you who have Android as well, so don't feel left out. I don't know, Brent or Isabel, if you wanted to sort of like contextualize anything that Oksana just said from your own experiences before we turn to the next question. I see Dr. Lilly has a question, but maybe let's see, Brent, Isabel.
I think she really make a very solid comment, and I think we should just give more opportunity for people to ask more questions. So this is my comment.
Good.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is I think there's a lot that can be learned from students, especially as it relates to technology. They've come from a wide range of different backgrounds and different exposures to various technological tools, and sometimes learning from them. They're not bashful about sharing when things don't work, but sometimes it helps to be, proactive and ask, what sort of experiences have you had in other classes, other online environments that perhaps, I could learn from, incorporate to my class.
Thank you. What's the question from Dr. Lilly, Alex?
All right. Well, I'm going to open Flavius's mic. His question is really the $64,000 question. It's the thing everyone's thinking about. No one's brought it up yet. Flav, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you to the panelists. A very, intriguing discussion. Appreciate you all for taking the time out of your day to do it. I'm just very curious what your opinions are about what your teaching will look like after the crisis abates. Will it be changed forever? Will it go back to what we might call normal? I mean, how's that going to look for each of you?
Great question, Flav. So I think everyone should have the opportunity to weigh in here. So how about it? Brent?
I think one thing that I will definitely carry over into the post-pandemic world is being very thoughtful about what has to take place in a classroom versus what can be done as pre-class reading, pre-class video. I think in the past, as a number of my fellow panelists have alluded to, I might have gotten a little bit lazy about stuffing a little bit of lecture into something that's designed to be or is intended to be, purely active learning. And I think this has forced me to be more thoughtful about what things have to be in that synchronous session versus what can be moved out of it. So that's what I really hope to carry forward after this.
Thanks. David?
So exactly so. The tools that I'm learning to make the maximal use of that synchronous time, the tools that I'm using to be able to create asynchronous content so in order to maximize the use of that synchronous time in class, that's something that I'm going to take as a gift going forward. And so generations of students after this year will hopefully benefit from having much more profitable use of our synchronous class time.
Adam, what are you taking forward?
So as a course or a topic that has a lot of tactile component, when this passes over, we'll be returning to, I guess, what you call business as usual. But there's been a lot of components of the student engagement, the asynchronous elements of the online world, the case motivational components. All of those, I think, are things that I fully intend to carry forward to enrich the returning in-person components of what we do.
Thanks. Isabel?
In my case, in dentistry, I don't see moving completely online in the near future for the nature of have simulations and patient care, unless robotics and virtual reality, which is way ahead. But I think it's also opportunity for teaching our students how to engage the patients online and how to use the technology to really create this rapport and relationship with the patient, even before the patient comes to your first visit.
Your point about the patient is well stated. I participated yesterday for the first time. I don't think this is a HIPAA violation for the HIPAA experts out there. In a telemedicine session with my daughter and one of the faculty members from the School of Medicine actually yesterday, and it was just spectacular. And it was a very productive, useful, engaging session. It was just remarkable to me how that faculty member, that doctor, was able to engage with me, my daughter, her mother, in this virtual format, and saved us a trip downtown. So it definitely works.
Yeah. I think For me, everything that all of you said, right? I don't envision this being fully my future. I love to teach in person. I think our students want that. But I think for me, probably the biggest learning, I've been teaching for a long time. We're all experts in our fields, but being put back in that learner's mind again, and the humility that comes from sort of having to rethink things was a good reminder of how much I enjoy the learning process myself, and to sort of not. We rarely have time to think and revise our courses, because I think we're so busy doing other things in service. And so having to do this and remembering, how useful it is was very good for me. And then having the support to work through these questions and think about the connection between content and process in order to improve both, right? Delivery of the education and what are our pedagogical goals. That's the gift, and maybe every 15 years after we think of it, probably I'll be doing it more often. I hope moving forward, whatever the teaching method is.
Alex, could we squeeze in one question, or we should be aiming to wrap up? I want to be guided by you here.
I just wanted to add one quick comment
sorry,
on that
David.
last question, which is assessment tools as well. That's something that is going to, I think, will make a big difference long term, is diversifying the way that we assess, using different assessment tools, and as a consequence, really changing our assessment model. That's something that is going to, that's a change that's going to last for me.
And David, you made my day by mentioning the word assessment, because as Greg knows, he and I were responsible for making sure the university maintains its middle states accreditation. And one of the things that they care about, and this is true for all the accreditors of the professional programs as well, is assessment. How are we assessing student learning? So as we move to, by necessity, having to teach more and more online, the expectation by our accreditors, which is why I'm confident that we'll be able to offer a quality educational experience for our students, isn't going to be lower relative to us assessing the student learning that's happening online. They're not going to care what venue we offer, which is why I think the faculty has thrown themselves into it so much, which is why, again, I'm so confident saying to our students, their parents, and anyone else who inquires, that I have no doubt that the students will get a quality education, even though it's happening in the online environment. Alex?
Well, it's interesting. While you were talking about the future, we did have a number of comments. Two stand out. One says this has forced us to be more engaging, which is a very good point. The other is that I don't see myself going back to pre-COVID teaching, and I think that'll be a good thing. So we do have one question from our Facebook Live feed, and this was sort of aimed at David from back early when you talked about your traumatic experience making this change, and I think you speak for a lot of people, or spoke for a lot of people. He says, David, what was your breakthrough for when you felt comfortable with online instruction? Was it a piece of advice you received? Was it learning a certain approach or a particular piece of software? Do you remember what it was that you had that breakthrough, that epiphany?
So I'm not sure that I'm any kind of expert or that I've had that breakthrough, but I'll tell you two things that I just shifted in the way that I approach this. One, Corey just mentioned, is that it's an opportunity to learn a whole new set of skills, to learn a new way of approaching teaching, to learn a new set of pedagogies. And so it's been exciting to be on that steep learning curve. And the other one that I think Corey also mentioned earlier, which is showing myself a lot of grace and just recognizing that it is not going to be perfect, as Christina pointed out. But somebody in one of the sessions that I attended said, just go do something and let perfection go. And so that has been my attitude. I just record a lecture, and if there are ums, there are ahs, I got the date wrong on a case, so be it. I'm on to the next recorded lecture. Because what's most important, I think, is that we really engage this process, engage our students, and do our very best, and recognize that next semester we'll be better at it, and on and on and on. But those are the two breakthroughs that I've had. I don't know if they amount to success, but they make me feel more comfortable with the process.
Thank you for that, David. I think that's a good note for me to summarize on, and then maybe I leave a minute for Alex to say whatever he says to close out. But let me start by thanking you all, the panelists, each of you, for participating. I personally found this a very stimulating conversation, and it was an honor for me to be able to host you as panelists. I hope the audience took something away from it, and among those things, it's evidence that our faculty do care here a great deal about the learning experience for our students and have thrown themselves in and invested the time and effort to make sure that that learning experience remains at the very high level we've come to expect here at UMB. Thank you all for tuning in. Alex, I'll kick it back to you.
Thank you. I just want to mention one thing, and that is that this program, Virtual Face-to-Face with Dr. Bruce Jarrell, is going to take a break for the next 2 weeks because Dr. Jarrell is going to take a break. The program will return September 10th with Arts and the Pandemic, how artwork can relieve stress during COVID-19. The guests are First Lady Yumi Hogan, Aaron Hager, Roosevelt Hammett, and Oksana Mishler, who we just heard from.
All right,
we'll
great.
See you on September 10th.
Thank you all, panelists and audience. Thank you all.